Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be talking about something that everyone is interested in, and that is the world champion Magnus Carlsen, as well as myself. Now, an article just dropped 1 hour ago. We're going to cover it in just a second, but in case you want to read the entire article, make sure to click that link below to read it, because we're just going to talk about parts and then dive right into some games that I played against Magnus. So here we go. There's this article, Carlsen on what Nakamura calls his biggest mistake. Now, as some of you know, I did a podcast not so long ago with Lex Fridman. There will probably be a link to that as well. And in it, what I referred to is I said that playing a 40-game match against Magnus Carlsen was probably the biggest mistake of my career. Now, there are many reasons for that, and just to give some context, this match occurred on the very last day, December 31st in the year 2010. Now, we had both played in the Town Memorial Tournament. It was a very long, grueling classical event. And then after the event, there was a World Blitz, and I think it was just World Blitz at the time. I don't think there was a rapid portion. And so after this event, it was the final night. I went out for some drinks, had a nice dinner with one of the owners of the Internet Chess Club that night. His name is Rui Mora. I was out having a good time, and then towards the end of my dinner, I believe that Rui, if I'm not mistaken, got a call from Macaulay Peterson, a journalist as well, who asked him if I would be willing to play a match against Magnus. Now, as it happened, we did end up playing a 40-game match at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel right near the Red Square. Fantastic event, fantastic conditions. I cannot stress that enough. So we played a 40-game match. Now, I'm not 100% sure what the final score was. Some people in this article, even it says, some people say it was 24.5, 15.5 in favor of Magnus. Others say it was 23.5, 16.5. Regardless, it was a lot of fun to play, but the main reason I called it the biggest mistake is because of the fact that I felt like Magnus learned more than I did. So jumping into the article, we're going to cover one little bit specifically. Now we're going to go down here towards the end of the article, and we have something in particular. The match was played with 3 minutes per player plus a 1-second increment each move. Nakamura says the games made him realize how difficult it was to beat the future world champion, as Carlsen defended endgames amazingly well. Speaking to NRK, the Norwegian doesn't buy his rival's takeaway from the match. He has done very well with his chess, so it all worked out. I doubt it was decisive unless he really got inside his own head. Carlsen does agree that his rival's openings were poor at the time, which gave him an edge in the Blitz match. It was partly because his openings were bad, especially with Black, and in part due to some psychological factor. I think he was more inside his own head than necessary. At least I didn't think about it like that. Over the last couple of years, Nakamura has combined a very successful career as a full-time streamer with several good results in over-the-board chess, taking him to 5th place on the FIDE rating list, his highest spot since 2015. Now, again, to get into it without like getting too complicated, what I was saying when I said that he defended amazingly well is that in the match, if I recall correctly, up until maybe the last 5 or 10 games, the gap between Magnus and myself, I think, was 2 to 3 games. But the reason that it was 2 to 3 games instead of being close was there were many games where I had advantages in the end game, say like rook bishop and 3 pawns, or rook knight and 2, end games of the sort where objectively it's a draw with perfect play, but you have to be perfect, and Magnus was perfect. He defended some end games that I really did not expect him to be capable of defending, and so maybe that played into some of the psychological stuff. But nonetheless, when Magnus says he doesn't buy into what I'm saying, let's give you some good examples. So when we talk about openings, we're going to change the scene, of course. Let me change the scene. Here we go, and away we go. So I'm going to give you guys 4 examples of games that I played against Magnus Carlsen where I got smoked in the opening. Now, to be very clear, I do want to state one thing in case people think that I'm trying to say in some way that this would have changed the outcome, or like the world would be different today, like butterfly effect stuff. I am not saying that, because even if you exclude these 4 games that I'm about to show you guys, I still would be down by a score of 10 to 1. So in no way am I stating that. I do want to make that very clear in case people think that I'm trying to say, well, you know, these 4 games go differently. I would have been world champion or something insane like that. Okay, so first game we have is a game between Magnus Carlsen and myself, played in Tatasil Vaikonze in 2011. Now, this tournament is very memorable for me because in spite of losing this game to Magnus, I did actually win the tournament, being the first American to win a major super tournament, and I want to say like 130 years or something. I think Gary Kasparov commented on it as well. All right, so first game, we're going to look at it from Magnus's point of view, not from my point of view, since I lost every game. So we get e4, c5, knight f3. I play d6, d4, takes, knight c3, and a6. Now, this, of course, is a classic Najdorf opening that Gary Kasparov played. In fact, I think Gary might have even suggested that I play this against Magnus for this specific game. Magnus plays bishop to e2 here, e5, knight b3, bishop to e7, and now Magnus played this very tricky move, bishop e3. Another famous world champion had a game after castles, bishop e6, f4, queen c7. This guy by the name of Garry Kasparov against Vishy Anand, I think it was Linares, maybe 2001. So this position is completely fine for black. However, Magnus tricks me here in the opening by changing the move order. He plays this move bishop e3, and when I castle, which is a mistake, instead of playing bishop e6 here after castles, Magnus plays g4. Now again, the game is not necessarily decided because of this move, but as you guys can tell from the bar, after this ninth move, 9g4, white is better by 0.9. Now this didn't cause me to lose the game. I'll just show a few more moves. We got bishop e6, g5, knight d7, h4, knight to b6, queen d2, knight 8 d7, f4, takes, knight e5, and castles. And as you can tell from the evaluation bar, it's still giving white a big advantage. Magnus would go on to win this game. But a lot of the issues that occurred in this game were specifically because on move number 8, I inexplicably castled. Now, you can say like, okay, maybe you were in your head, whatever it was, you forgot your theory. Fact is, I made the mistake, I castled, and after move number 9, I was already in a very bad situation, and I would go on to lose this game. So this is example number 1. So let's keep moving forward. Next example we have is a game between Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura, played in Tatasil, Vaikanze in 2013. Now this game I'm gonna have a little bit more to say about. So we get e4, I play c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, takes, e5. Now lo and behold, those of you guys who watched me play in the American Cup very recently, you also saw me play the classic Kalashnikov opening. Now in St. Louis I did very well with it, but in this game it did not go well. So we get Magnus playing g3 here. Of course, in my game against Dominguez played knight 1 c3, a6, knight a3, and then the show goes on. So this is bishop e6, knight d5, and rook b8, just to be very clear for what you guys are wondering. Or sorry, bishop e6, knight c4, rook b8 was the correct line, and then knight to d5. Again, you can watch the video very specifically. It's on our channel from the American Cup where I did my recap. At any rate here, Magnus plays g3, trying to fianchetto the bishop to g2. I play h5 here. Now this move is not actually that bad of a move, but at the same time it's also a very aggressive thrust because I'm trying to push my pawns on the king side. On the other hand, you could say that I was a pioneer, and even though this game was played maybe like 10 years before Alpha Zero came around, I was already pushing pawns on the edge of the board. So I understood the computer concepts, but at the end of the day, I couldn't execute them, and especially not against the world champion Magnus Carlsen. So we get h5, knight 1 c3 is played here. I go a6 to kick the pony, because if I play just a move like h4 trying to push p, after knight to d5, white's knights are jumping in the center of the board, and it's a complete catastrophe. So I play a6, knight to a3, b5, knight d5, knight g7, and somewhere around here, maybe it was even after h5, Magnus went into a very, very deep thing. Now he's trying to figure out what's going on in the opening, like why am I pushing on the edge of the board, what is his conceptual setup, is he going bishop g2, c3, knight c2, bishop e3, maybe there are a lot of different paths forward for white. But in my mind, I remember this very clearly during the game, the way that I was looking at the situation was, it's like Magnus is thinking for a long time, he's feeling pressure, I'm gonna win this game. And so I started getting a little bit too emotional. I started having these feelings when he was thinking for 20 to 25 minutes, and I'm just like, I'm starting to have these delusions of grandeur, expecting good things to happen, rather than remaining objective and realizing, well, Magnus is just using his time here. He's just thinking, like, there's nothing more to it. It's not like you're going to win the game, you surprise, and big deal, the show goes on. But in my mind, I remember I was starting to already think, well, Magnus is surprised, I'm going to attack him on the king side, it's all really, really good. But the reality is quite different. So Magnus plays bishop g2, and here I play this move bishop g4. Now this is not a terrible move, but what I should have done is I should have traded the knights, put the knight on e7, and played for g6 and bishop g7, or bishop h6, maybe even ideas like f5 down the road. So instead I play bishop g4, Magnus plays f3, I go bishop back to e6, and now he plays c3, logical move to bring this other knight to the center of the board. Here I play h4, Magnus goes knight c2, I take, I play knight a5, and now he plays this move f4, and lo and behold, we're now suddenly on move 15, and we've gone from a situation where in the opening, the first couple of moves, I was feeling really good about myself, to now here where once again you guys can see the bar, and already white is better by 0.7. So the game continues with knight f5, he goes g4, play h3, bishop e4, knight h4, Magnus castles, and already here it's a disaster. I have both knights on the rim, white has the bishop pair, one of his bishops is in the center, and additionally I can't even really attack the white king because there are two pawns in front. Game goes on with g6, Magnus plays king h1, just a move to sort of sidestep anything happening on the f file, and again, I don't really have a lot of play. So here I go bishop g7, Magnus plays f5, I take, he takes back, and I go knight g2, Magnus plays f6, bishop f8, queen to f3, and already the game is effectively over because now I have a bishop that's stuck on f8. This pawn really prevents activity. I can maybe go to h6, but I also have a knight on g2 that looks pretty, supported by the pawn, but it's also just staring at a bunch of air. Additionally, I have my other knight on the rim, and also the queen, the king, and the rooks are on their original starting squares, so it's already over. As you guys can tell, it's gone from basically smallish from white to +3 out of thin air. So I play queen c7, knight to b4, knight b7, Magnus goes knight to c6. Brutal move because now there's a great knight protected by the pawn. Knight c5, bishop f5. I continue to struggle for a few more moves with knight to d7, but after bishop g5, guarding the pawn on f6, rook to g8, Magnus now goes queen h5, and it's over. All my pieces are terrible here. I've got one knight that's developed, protected by the pawn, but the knight can't attack anything. I can't castle my king. My rooks are on the back rank. Bishop is dead on f8, no squares. White has a great knight on c6. Every single piece here for white is fantastic. So I play knight b6, Magnus goes bishop e6, guarding the pawn, creating a wooden shield as well. I play rook takes knight, queen takes, and here I take the bishop on e6, and after pawn takes pawn, I have to resign because I'd love to capture the juicer here and try to fossilize him, but white has f7, checkmate. King has no squares that it can move to. So a complete disaster here. After d takes e6, once again I get blown away, and it was really rough because, again, to go from those emotional feelings of where you feel like you're doing really well in the opening, Magnus is surprised you're going to finally beat him, and he used that time, comes with a concept, and I'm not able to sort of readjust, and I just get blown away, completely blown away out of the opening for a second time against Magnus. So let's keep moving on. Next game we have is a game from the Tal Memorial in 2013. Again, playing with the black pieces. Magnus plays c4, I go e6, g3, d5, bishop g2, c6, queen to c2, knight f6, knight f3. All pretty standard here. I'm playing the classic triangle setup here with the pawns, pushing them out like this. In this time period around 2013 to 2014, I was playing a lot of Slavs, so it was pretty common. So here I decide to take the pawn. Magnus captures, play b5, queen to b3. This all, I believe, is still pretty standard here, nothing too crazy. Bishop to b7, Magnus castles, and here I think I start to go wrong. First I play knight d7. I think developing the bishop and castling is supposed to be a little bit more precise, but I play knight bd7, we get d4, I go a6 here, planning to play c5 and open up the diagonal. If I were to play c5 right away, I simply hang the juice on b5. So I go a6 to guard the pawn and prepare to push and open up the scope for the light square bishop. Magnus plays knight e5 here, I play queen to b6, and now Magnus finds this excellent move, bishop to e3. And on first glance, you're thinking, well, it's nothing super special, right? It doesn't look that bad. But with the stronger computers and more depth, white is actually already much better. Now here I play c5, trying to open up the scope, trade off the light square bishops. Magnus takes, I take back, and now he plays this move d5. Now at this point, it's already very unpleasant for me. As you can see, once again, in the story of this video, it's already 0.6 for white. Now the best way to play this is simply trade everything off on d5 here and keep going forward with like rook d8. Now again, after rook to d1 followed by knight c3, let's say bishop e7, knight c3, it just looks iffy here because white's trying to jump with the pony to d5. There's a slight issue on the d file. There's even moves like potentially like a b4 to put pressure on this pawn on c5 due to the pin, and it just doesn't really feel all that great. That being said, after castles, it should be kind of okay. So instead I play e5. Now e5, of course, as you guys can see from the bar, terrible move. a4 played by Magnus, I go b4, knight to d2, and already it's a disaster. I have a terrible light square bishop hemmed in by the pawn on d5, so I'm staring at the pawn, so this is passive. White's getting a gigantic bastion with the pony on c4, and already it's probably, technically speaking, close to lost. So I play bishop d6, Magnus plays knight c4, queen to c7, and now he plays this great move f4, trying to open up the center of the board. I castle here. Magnus plays rook ac1 with the idea of potentially, let's just say I play h6, of trading everything off and simply winning the pawn on c5, which is the whole purpose of putting this rook on c1 here. So Magnus puts the rook on c1 to put pressure on the pawn on c5. I play e takes f4, he takes, I have to trade the bishops, I go a5, and now Magnus plays e4, and white has 3 connected pawns in the center of the board. There's a big white center here. He's got a bastion. Already it's pretty much an epic fail situation. So I go rook a e8, Magnus plays e5, I go bishop a6, Now he goes rook fe1, king h8, and here he plays knight d6. White is just simply crushing here. These pawns in the center, the great knight, my bad light square bishop, pawns here on the queen side, and I can almost already just resign. So instead I play rook e7, Magnus plays queen to e3, I go queen to d8 here, plays b3, sort of a slow move, trying to go knight e4 and just win this positionally by winning the pawn on c5. I go g5 here, Magnus plays king to h1, maybe not the best move. Knight f5 is perhaps a little bit stronger, but the position is so overwhelming for white here due to this great bastion, the weak king, and these big pawns in the center, that it's still completely hopeless. So I play queen b8, Magnus goes queen f2, I trade on f4, I play bishop d3 here, and now Magnus plays this move rook e3. Now this is a big mistake here. One thing that I think Magnus himself has said, that I'm a very good defender and I find resources all the time. Now that being said, one of the big differences between myself now versus say going back a couple of years, 10 years ago, of course this could never happen, but just going back over the last like year or two, is that when I'm playing these games and I'm in these situations, I have this mindset where I always believe there are going to be opportunities. I know there are going to be opportunities no matter how bad the position is, where if I can just find that move, that critical sequence at the right moment, everything will be fine. So Magnus actually is winning this game, you see, completely pressing me, but he made a mistake with rook e3 here. Now unfortunately for me, I didn't spot the tactic, which is I could have played rook takes pawn here, because after rook takes bishop, queen takes knight, black is suddenly up a pawn here, and white doesn't actually have any attack towards the king. All these dark squares are completely covered by the queen and the knight. And after white gobbles the rook on e5, I can play queen takes knight here, attacking the rook on e5 twice. And when white moves the rook, I can simply trade and now play c4. And it's getting very, very chaotic here, because if white takes with the pawn, I can go knight to c5 here, blockading these two pawns. And now I'm just going to start pushing p. I also have two connected pawns. So say white plays like h4, I go b3, idea of b2 to win the game, rook to f2, rook to b8 here, threatening b2 again. And if white plays rook to b2, I simply take the pawn on a4, and after the rook moves, I go b2, and now I'm going to get a queen, or white will have to give up one of the towers for this pawn, and I will win. So rook takes e5 is actually a great move that would have saved the game. Unfortunately, I was not able to find it. Instead, I played bishop g6, and now after rook to f1, I again have rook takes e5, but it's a little bit less effective here, because once Magnus takes and I take back, and he goes rook to e8 here, which is a very, very strong move, by the way, I no longer get to play for these pawn pushes with c4 anymore. Worth noting also, my bishop on g6 much more passive than on d3, where it would have prevented white from having a tower on this open file. So rook e8 is played, I take the queen, Magnus takes my rook with check, I play king g7, he takes, I take with the king, and now he finds this very important move d6 here, because white needs to activate this light square bishop. Right now the bishop is very passive, and because of this 3-on-2 on the queen side, if I could get like one extra move with bishop c2, I might even just be winning here, because after rook f3 I go c4, takes b3, and white cannot stop this pawn from getting down the board without sacrificing the rook for it. So if I get even one move, I could win this game. I could get my first ever win against Magnus, but alas, of course, naturally it's white's move here, and Magnus plays d6. d6, very good move, because now you can also put the bishop on d5 to guard the pawn on b3. I go knight e5, he plays bishop f1 here, which is, I think, okay. Bishop d5 maybe is also playable, but he goes bishop f1, I go bishop c2 here, Magnus plays bishop b5, trying to push p towards the end of the board. Here I go f5, Magnus plays king g2, I go c4, and now after bishop takes c4, I simply don't have any play. I would love to take the pawn on b3, but after rook takes f5, knight to f7, d7, I have to bring the king to stop the pawn, and after rook takes pawn, I have this passed pawn on b4, but it's a lone pawn, and white can even probably just bring the king over and win the game. So I play c4 here, Magnus takes, I play bishop to e4 check, plays king g3, I take, and I go king to e8. Now I'd love to play b3 here, and on first glance it's like, oh my gosh, what, black must be winning. You get b2, b1, like rook f1, b2, you get b1, and it's game over. But in typical fashion, after rook to f2 here, if I go bishop c2, white has the unbelievable move rook to e2, which cuts off my king from getting to the center of the board. If I go b2, white plays d7, I make a queen, he makes a queen, let's just say king g7, there's check, king f7, rook e7 check, king f8, and now queen to g7 checkmate, and I lose the game. So because of rook e2, white is simply going to win the game. Again, another situation where if I have one more move, just one more move, I could potentially get my first win against Magnus, but alas, it's not meant to be. So after b takes c4, I go king e8 instead, having seen the rook f2 rook e2 idea. Try to blockade these pawns and push the b pawn down the board. Magnus plays c5. I go bishop to c6 here. He takes the pawn. I play bishop takes a4, trying to use these two pawns, trying to do something, because I can always blockade these white pawns quite easily with the bishop on the light square diagonal. But Magnus plays rook e5. I go king d8, and now he finds a very important move, rook to e7, because if I play b3, white can go rook b7, stopping the pawn from pushing further up the board. Let's say I go king c8, white just goes rook b6, king d7, and now brings the king to the party because I can't push the pawn. I can't move the bishop. I move the bishop, I lose the pawn. I push the pawn, I lose the pawn. So both the bishop and the pawn are completely paralyzed. They're stuck on these two squares, and white is just going to bring the king and win the game. So I played bishop c6, trying to stop rook b7. Again, if white were to go king f4 and I get b3, there is a chance with these two pawns that I could win the game. But here Magnus correctly plays rook c7, and I have to resign the game because when I move the bishop to say b5 here, white can now go c6, and after b3, there are many ways for white to win, but probably the cleanest is simply to go rook to b7, and after takes, rook takes b3, king d7, and rook to d3, and the rook will stop the a pawn from getting down the board. White's just going to bring the king to e5, and it's a very technical win. So after rook to c7, I have to resign this game as well. So now you've seen 3 games where I've messed up in the opening. Surely I can't do it again, right? I mean, we've seen the worst of the worst. But no siree, we have yet again another example. Example number 4 from St. Louis, Missouri, the Singfield Cup in 2014, playing with the black pieces against Magnus once again. We get d4, I play d5, c4, c6. As I mentioned before, during this time period I was playing the Slav defense a lot. Magnus plays knight to c3, and now I take the pawn on c4. Now during this time period I was playing this line a lot. I actually had another heartbreaking game, I believe in the same year. Yeah, it was in 2014. I think it was either right before or right after the Singfield Cup, in the last round of the Chess Olympiad in Tromsø, Norway, where I also played this d takes c4 line against Shakira Mamadiyar from Azerbaijan. We had a very, very tough fight, tough battle, but unfortunately I did lose that game as well. And shortly thereafter I stopped playing the Slav altogether, so everything worked out when all is said and done. But the moral of the story here is don't play the Slav. So I played d takes c4. Magnus plays e3. Now I go b5. We get a4. I play b4, knight to e4 here. Now this of course is a very sharp line. What you're trying to do with black here by pushing the pawns up the board, it's not so much about saving your extra pawn here, but it's more that if white has to move the knight back to say a2, which is a traditional approach, after e6, guarding the pawn, white captures. You just basically develop normally here, and your argument is that the white knight is very misplaced on a2. It can't capture the pawn, and it can't get back to the center with knight c3 because the pawn will capture the knight. So Magnus here goes knight e4. I play queen to d5, attacking the knight. He goes knight to d2 here, trying to win back this extra pawn on c4. So here I play c3. Magnus trades, and now he goes knight to b1. And what you'll notice about this position is white is trying to get the knight back to the center of the board very, very quickly here. Whereas in the other variation, when you look at this position, knight can't get back to the board. But if you could remove this pawn and the knight could get to c3, then white can try to push in the center. So what white has done here is that Magnus is trying to get the knight to the center, but I can't really save the pawn, so I won't be able to avoid white getting a knight to c3, supporting central pawn pushes. So I play queen a5 here, trying to hang on to this extra pawn. Now it's worth noting also, of course, anyone who's watched this video, like, what are you doing, man? Like, you tell us to like develop our pieces, and you look at this game and you're like, all these pawn moves, like you've literally played, this is move number 9, and you've played nothing but pawn moves, and you brought the queen out a couple of times. Like, what are you guys selling us? Like, this is not how you tell us to play chess one way, and then you're doing the exact opposite. Now of course in this situation it's worth noting that white also has all of his pieces on the back rank. So even though I've moved my queen and a lot of pawns, white has no development either. So Magnus plays queen to c2 here. Now I play e5, trying to strike hard, strike first, and show no mercy in the center of the board. Magnus plays knight to f3 so he can recapture here with the knight on d4. So here I play knight to a6, which is kind of not a very good move, but is based on some trickery. What I'm hoping for here is that after knight takes e5 and knight b4, Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, will make an elementary blunder and play queen takes pawn. Now after queen takes pawn, you have this great move, knight to c2 check, forking the king and the rook, and white cannot capture with the queen because then I would capture your king. So if this happens after king d1, for example, you trade the queens, take the rook, I'd be well on my way to a first victory over Magnus Carlsen. Of course Magnus doesn't do that. Instead, Magnus plays queen b3 here, trying to checkmate me on this f7 square. I play bishop to e6. Magnus goes bishop c4, and I play c2 here. Magnus takes the bishop, seeing no ghost. Now on first glance, when you look at this position, again, it feels kind of scary for white, because when white takes his bishop, it's like, well, there are fossils, you can make a queen, like knight d3, all sorts of things going on. But as you guys can tell from the evaluation bar, we're on move 15, and yet again, what is going on? White is up by more than 3 points here. So already in 15 moves, I've yet again found a way to get myself into an absolutely horrible situation where I am completely lost. So I play knight d3 with the double check of the king here from the queen and the knight, but Magnus can very quietly go king e2. If he had to play king f1, boom, bing, bang, boom, I get queen e1 with the checkmate, and I win my first game against Magnus Carlsen. But of course, Magnus doesn't do that. He is the best player in the world, and he plays king to e2 here. So now I play knight takes knight here, trying to stop white from doing anything on this f7 square, because the knight guards it. Magnus takes the knight, I take the bishop, he takes back, I block here, and now he goes knight to d2. Here I play queen to d5 here, because at this point the problem is that even though neither side is developed, white has a very obvious plan of putting the knight on either c4 or e4 and jumping to the critical d6 square to go after my king. And I can't get my king out of the center because the knight is pinned, and also I can't castle due to the queen covering the square. So I play queen d5. It's like, okay, let's bail out into an endgame, maybe I can save it, but it's not gonna happen. We trade the queens. Magnus goes knight to e4 here to stop any tricks with knight c3. I play rook to b8, he goes bishop d2, I play bishop b4, and now he plays rook hc1, going after the pawn on c2. Now it's important to take stock of the position, because you do have to count how many pawns each side has. Now here white has 1 2 3 4 5 6, black is 1 2 3 4 5. So if I can hang on to this pawn on the 7th rank, I will always have some chances to save the game. But if I lose the pawn, I just lose without any chances at all. So it's a matter of whether I can save it. So I trade the bishops here. I go knight to b4, guarding this passed pawn. Magnus plays knight to f3, and already here the position is effectively lost, because I have no way of stopping white from getting to either the d4 or the e1 square to capture this pawn. Now here I play king to e7. Magnus goes knight to e1. I play rook d8, plays f4. Now you could take on c2, and this probably is also winning, but after knight to d3, rook b1, and knight takes e5, I'm still only down a pawn here, the central pawn, and I can try to hope for some kind of miracle. Magnus, of course, being a great endgame player, plays this move f4 to guard the pawn on e5 first before capturing the pawn on c2. Here I play c5. Magnus takes the pawn. I go knight to d3, and now he plays rook b1, and as you'll notice, all the pawns are connected, they're guarded, and I can effectively resign. So I play knight to b2. Magnus goes rook a2. I take this pawn on a4, takes the rook on b8, not rook takes knight, by the way, because then you would lose the tower on b1. He takes, I throw in the tickle check first on c3. Magnus plays king f3. I take the rook. I don't take this one because after rook takes pawn, I'll be losing all the pawns on the 7th rank. So I play knight takes rook. Magnus plays rook to b5. Another excellent move here, because now I can't really guard this pawn. If I play rook c8 to guard the pawn like this, then white has rook b7, classic kebab territory where he wins pawns on the 7th rank. And if I go rook to d5 to guard the pawn, white can simply go rook to a5, attacking both the knight and the pawn at the same time. So I play knight b4 here. Magnus trades, he takes the pawn, and there's a saying we have in chess, which is that all rook and pawn endgames are drawn. But here I'm down 2 pawns, and more importantly, white's rook is very active. So I play rook to a8 here, hoping that with the rook behind the passed pawn, maybe there's going to be a miracle, but of course there isn't. Magnus plays king e4. I go a5. He plays rook to a4 here, stopping the pawn from pushing. And now the problem is that in a lot of endgames with the rook behind the pawn, you can play on the other side of the board, but here white has 5 pawns in the center slash king side, and I only have 2. So even though I have this pawn which is stopping the rook from coming into the game, white is just going to push p up the board and win very simplistically. So I play king f7. Magnus goes g4. I play king e7. We get f5 here, h6, h4, trying to create passed pawns. King f7, e6. I go king f6. I thought he was going to go king f4. I guess king f4 also wins with g5, but he goes rook d4 here to play for rook d7 and rook f7 checkmate. I go king e7, check, king f8, and now Magnus plays this very nice move, pawn to e7, ending the game on the spot. There are many ways to win here. White could also play g5, a4, and f6. This is also completely winning. As you can see, it's plus 28. But once you get a winning position, if you can simplify it to a position where you will win 100 times out of 100, that's more important than, like, say basketball. It's like you have this situation where you can just lay it up, and you're gonna lay it up 100 times out of 100. or you can go for the showboating opportunity and try to, you know, make that great slam dunk. Now you're going to make that slam dunk probably like 95% of the time, but there are going to be those 5 times when you try to go for the dunk and you slam it and the ball doesn't go in, it goes way out, and of course it's on the highlight reels and everyone's laughing at you. So you'd rather win 100 out of 100. So Magnus plays e7 here. I go king e8. He plays his move rook to d8, which trades the rooks, and now we're in a king and pawn endgame. And even though I have the outside pass pawn pushing up the board, white's king is very, very close, and with 4 connected, there's no way for me to use my king to win his pawns. I play king, actually, sorry, king takes d8. He goes king d5, king e7, g5 here, stopping the king from getting to f6. I play a4, king to c4 here. And if I go a3 after king b3, I will lose this pawn on one of these 2 squares. And so I trade. I go king d6. Magnus plays e4, king to e5, and now he plays this move king to b4, going after the pawn on a4. And unfortunately, there's nothing I can do here. I'd love to gobble the pawn on e4, and after takes, king takes f5, I could win the game. But when I gobble this pawn here on e4, white just pushes the pawn forward. Pawns support each other. After we trade, I go king e5, f7, king e6, but white gets a queen and white wins the game. So I can't really capture the pawn, and if I can't capture the pawn, the only other move I can play is king d6, and after takes, king b5, king d6, king c4, king e5, king d3, king d6, king d4. White's king is now back in the center of the board, and with the 3 pawns going up the board, there's no chance of any kind of miracle whatsoever. So after this move king to b4, I resign this game. Now this is the 4th and final example we're showing today of games where basically in the opening I made some big mistakes. Now as I said earlier, this in no way is trying to say that if these games, you know, let's just say I had 4 draws even out of these games, the score would still be 10-1. So in no way am I trying to state that it's like the world would be different. But when I made that comment about how I felt that he learned these things in that match, I do think it is relevant. And I think Magnus, I mean, whether you want to say it's about openings or whether it's me being in my head, it's very clear that in these openings, I was making mistakes. I was making big mistakes that should not happen at the top level. And again, people can psychoanalyze whatever it is. But it's what it is, and it is a little bit unfortunate, certainly, but I feel like you guys are going to enjoy this video. I mean, for me, it's a little bit I don't know if it's therapeutic or I'm a masochist or why I'm doing this video exactly, but I am, and obviously things have worked out pretty well, so I'm not going to complain. And hey, if having that Kalashnikov game against Magnus is the reason that I won the American Cup, having those bad memories, being objective about the opening led to me beating Dominguez, and so then I'm all for it. So hope you guys enjoyed this video. I think it's a topic that's quite interesting. If you guys do find other games though out of those 14 that I've lost in classical chess where I was losing by like move 15 or move 20, please do let me know in the comments below. Make sure to hit that subscribe button as well if you haven't already, and we'll be back tomorrow with some more great content. I think I'll be doing a recap from the Chess Champions Tour event, which I will start playing in. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and see you guys very, very soon. Bye.